All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming this morning, folks. We're going to be discussing the FUD from threat intelligence, and there's a lot of confusion out there about what TI is all about. So if we can walk away from this talk, with a better understanding of what threat intelligence really means, then this has been successful. Now, this is the only slide that has a wall of text, and I apologize, but I thought, you can read this at your own leisure, but the significance here is that everybody has a slightly different description of threat intelligence, even among, reputable security companies. You will see some similarities. They do talk about this being a discipline that focuses on threats and attacks, but there's also on the latter part of that portion have to be able to make better business decisions based on threat intelligence. So those are the two key factors in understanding really what at a high level description of threat intelligence. Now we'll kind of start off with a place that's pretty comfortable when it comes to threat intelligence, and that's indicators of compromise. Everyone thinks of TI, they think of hashes and IP addresses and domain names and things like that. But there's really a whole lot more to it than just indicators of compromise. Now that tends to be some of the more actionable and more tactical type of threat intelligence. So a lot of people kind of migrated towards that. But there's other disciplines within threat intelligence that are less indicator focused that are just as important. So the indicators of compromise would fit within this technical realm down here. When you get a little bit higher in the triangle there, the pyramid of pain, you have your tools, tactics, and procedures as well. But if you have the luxury of having insight into your attackers and have knowledge that there's an imminent threat, that kind of falls more on the operational side of threat intelligence. And of course, one of the more important areas is also the strategic. If you have the ability to influence upper management on where security needs to be moving, it's probably more important in some sense than passing indicators down to your controls. So you've got to be able to speak upstream, but you also have to be able to speak downstream when it comes to threat intel. Now this is just a couple of stats from the Symantec ISTR, and as Ryan was just talking in the previous, everyone is a target. I mean, no matter how small, how big you are. So regardless of what you think, security is critical, and everybody is a target.
That's totally a double entendre. Everybody's a target.
Yeah.
So a quick question about
Sure.
that. That's increase over what and for what base rate?
Increase in target attacks from last year. Yeah, the Symantec ISTR is an annual report, and this is based on their 2014 compared to the previous year. Sure. So, I mean, just last year alone, based on that information, there's a lot more people trying to customize their attacks instead of them being broad, widespread campaigns that are easier to detect and generate a lot more noise. The attackers are getting more specialized, especially with all the information that's getting stolen. It makes it easier to create a dossier and target your attack. Now we're also dealing with a significance in the frequency. You can't even see the years on the bottom of that, can you?
No, 30 years.
Yeah, I think that was I think this is based on 9 years of activity. And I mean, you can see a significant increase in what would be 2013, 2014 over here. And this is part of what's led to a lot of the hype associated with threat intelligence. Everybody, it's the buzzword and all that sort of stuff, and it's for good reason. I mean, all of security, in a sense, is getting a lot of buzz and a lot of attention, and these are the reasons why. The cost of the breach is interestingly kind of stable. You would think after so many years of breaches that we'd be getting better at responding and these costs of the breaches would be getting lower, but they're actually kind of stabilized for the most part. But that's not necessarily a good thing because, you might still be spending, somewhere around $200 per record in terms of your breaches, but you're dealing with a much higher frequency, much bigger breaches. So your actual cost is going to be more when you add all that up. But per record, it's surprisingly kind of stable. Is that where you were going?
That's exactly where I was going.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you would hope that the price would go down, but so far it doesn't appear to be moving in that direction.
One other major shift this year and last year is that now the floodgates for class action lawsuits have been opened up. So that number is going to increase if you also include those.
That's a good point. Absolutely. All right, this is another factor that's affecting the importance and push towards security and threat intel and things like that, is it's getting a whole lot easier. You used to have a lot more skill and knowledge to be able to pull off some of these attacks. But with the mature underground market, I mean, if you're a bad guy and you're only good at one thing, you can easily go out and find other people to supplement the skills that you're not good at. You might be great at denial of services, but you need somebody composing your phishing attacks or developing your malware or things like that. So the underground economy has made it a lot easier for unskilled attackers to generate their own campaigns. Now this is just a generalized kind of evolution of TI, and in a sense this is kind of the evolution of a whole security program. In the beginning you might only be dealing with prevention. You're just trying to survive. You're blocking as much as you can, but you don't have enough time to get much further than just block. So as you evolve, you'll get to the point where you can do a little bit more response in terms of flexibility. You'll have a lot more visibility into the things that are going on, which is going to improve all of your agility and your security program. And eventually you'll get to the point, of course, where you can actually dive in and see the attacks happening, and you can kind of make decisions on whether you want to let that attack continue, and you want to watch and see what the attackers are doing and lead them towards a honeypot. So, the sophistication will, of course, increase with time. But it does take an investment to get there. In terms of the detection, it's very similar to the previous in terms of the evolution there. Very beginning, antivirus, is really more of a preventive sort of thing. But with the volume of attacks, antivirus signatures, they're not dead, but they're not nearly as useful as they used to be. So you have to evolve into other detection mechanisms. And this is kind of an indication of how that evolution might occur.
So I was at a conference and IBM kind of went the other way. They were actually saying that it's really just volume now. That thing, the APT is still just an APT. Sorry to use the term, but they were neither advanced or really that persistent. It was just volume gameplay now. And I think you're pointing out pretty clearly that's the other side of the coin, right?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, there are certainly a big difference between your run-of-the-mill attackers and your APTs. I mean, you don't have to be sophisticated to have a successful campaign, but there's certainly very successful and sophisticated attackers out there. I mean, let's see, what was it? The group that Kaspersky, the Equation group, one of the attacks that they were, incredibly sophisticated sort of stuff. Yep, exactly, Dooku too. One of the most important elements of threat intelligence is you have to understand your environment internally, what's going on, especially in terms of your assets, because this is where the attackers are going after. So you definitely have to know what's going on in terms of your threats externally. But you can't make that stuff relevant if you don't know what's going on internally. So, I mean, sometimes you have the luxury of coming in and your organization already tells you what's a priority to them. Here's your intel requirements. This is what you need to go after. But in other cases, you might come in and the business just says, I want you to do threat intelligence. They don't give you necessarily any direction. So you have to spend the time understanding your environment, figuring out what's important to your company so that you can tailor your threat intelligence towards the threat profile of your business. And the threat profiling is similar to what we have here. Depending on the size of your organization and the type of business you might be in. If you're a large bank, you're probably dealing with all of these problems all of the time, concurrently, really. But if you're a small shop, maybe not dealing in a whole lot of transactions or something like that, you might have maybe only the left-hand side of that profile chart. Now, this was a presentation that was done by Ryan Stillings, and I think he did a really good job. And there's a couple more slides in here from his presentation. But this was a real good explanation of how the context of these attacks gets broken down and reconstructed. There's a cycle here. You've clearly got all this information that comes into your platform. You're going to push this information down to your tools, but these tools are going to generate events that your response team and forensics team might have to get involved in. They're going to learn some new things based on their investigation, maybe some other indicators of compromise, maybe they figure out what kind of tools were being used, what techniques the attackers had, and they can feed that information back into your platform. Now, this platform itself has its own cycle of information going on, and we'll look at that on the next slide, but externally is its own cycle. So you've got a lot of different things going on. You've got a lot of curation of the data here. You've got these events happening here that's feeding more data in. So it's a very active cycle. The threat intel part of it, there's a variety of different ways that people have tried to describe the process. They're slightly different, but there's enough similarities to where you can almost just pick any one of them and follow that to understand how the data is a continuous cycle. But you've got to collect as much of this information in as you can, identifying the stuff that's relevant to you, making assessments on that stuff, pushing the information out to your audience, getting feedback from them on whether that's valuable or not, and it feeds right back into collecting more data and starting all over again. This is from that Ryan Stillings presentation again. And I mean, it just kind of, I thought it was really useful here because a lot of people think that it's just a matter of getting a feed of some kind that has a bunch of IPs and bad hashes and things like that, and you push it straight down to your security controls and you're done. It's clearly a whole lot more to it than that. The first little block over there, and in his talk, he goes into each of these different phases and each of these steps. So I'd recommend looking at that full presentation if this slide interests you. But as you can see, I mean, you've got to get all the right data. I mean, you want to profile your company so that you're getting the data that's most relevant to the attackers. Obviously, you have to be able to deploy this information. With so many different security controls, you might not be able to push sticks down to a IDS machine. You might have to push regular expressions. You might have to push XML or JSON depending on the format that they take. So it's not a matter of just taking the information and then pushing it out. Once you bring the information in, you might have to format it and massage it in a way that it can even be used in the first place. And then, of course, you can't just keep taking on information without cleaning it and get rid of the stuff that's not relevant anymore. The incident response team might come back and tell you that this other data was useful, this data is not, so you can't keep it all. So there's going to be a point where you've got stuff that's is more valuable than others, and that will evolve through a lot of experience and trial and error. But clearly it's not an easy job of bringing in all this raw data about threats and just expecting to be able to improve your security controls without a lot of effort. There's a lot of variety in the platforms that are available, and I think this leads to the confusion a lot as well. I mean, like for your cloud-based collaborative threat exchanges, you've got the Microsoft Interflows, and you've got your Threat Connects, and you've got all these wonderful sharing platforms. Everybody's inviting you to come out there and share all your indicators, and that's great for collaboration. But in those platforms, you have no choice on what kind of data gets pulled in. It's only what the community collaborates on and adds. In some cases, they might be pulling stuff from your emerging threats and stuff like that, but there might be a source that's important to you that they're not willing to include in that platform. So it's great for collaboration, but it doesn't have the data that you want in that platform. So it fails on the collection side of it, the second one, or it might not be a good platform for analysis. So it tends to be very difficult to find a single platform that's good at collecting, it's good at collaborating, it's good at making an analysis, enrichment. It tends to be kind of a collection. To do it right at this point requires a collection of tools to pull all this stuff off. There is no one tool that can do it all. The FSI stack has its own, in a sense, its own platform that all the FIs are contributing to. You've also got, some of the private information sharing communities. They have their own platforms where you can go out and pull information. So there's a lot of sources, a lot of variety in what their capabilities are. Now, in terms of the providers, this is obviously a problem as well, leading to a lot of the FUD. The sales teams want to tell everybody that their company has threat intel, but after asking a few questions, it really might be nothing more than just a raw feed of indicators. So you have to be really careful. Listening, of course, to salespeople, anytime, but especially when it comes to threat intel. If you're seeking out specialized reports, specialized intel that's really relevant and meaningful to you, it's probably not going to be cheap, and you're going to have an intimate relationship with your vendor. Really, all the vendors, not just in TI, but in security in general, in my opinion, all they can provide is almost a one-size-fits-all, in a sense, type of security. It takes threat intel or your own security team to supplement those controls that are more specific to your organization. And that's one of the special things about threat intelligence, is that you can pull all this information together and supplement your existing controls beyond what your vendors are capable of doing. They, of course, come in all shapes and sizes and all different types of cost. And of course, the very little overlap, that's a very interesting one. And I think I've got the talk at the sources at the end of the slides here, but it was Ryan Trost did a presentation at Black Hat last year where he did an analysis of a lot of the different feeds and sources, and he looked at all this information and tried to do a comparison. And the interesting result was that of all these big, well-known companies, there was very, very little overlap in the information and bad IPs and bad domains that they had. And that's a challenge from a business perspective, because now you kind of feel like you have to buy a bunch of sources. You have to pay for sources everywhere to be able to get the big picture, because a lot of the vendors are only seeing a small subset of the problem. And they all seem to have a little bit of a unique perspective. And of course, going forward, the emphasis is that the data that's coming from our vendors, it's got to have more context. It can't just be a bad IP or a bad hash. You need to know where it came from, or maybe what it was affiliated with, what type of attack, or even languages and things like that. Any kind of data that can be added to the threat information can be very valuable in making decisions. This is a set of intelligence objectives that we put together at my day job, and it's what we call our neighborhood approach. If people are trying to break into your house or your company, obviously that's going to be your number one priority. So you need to spend a majority of your time concerned about things that are directly affecting your company. Now, if people are breaking into your neighbor's house, you might want to know how they're getting in. Are they breaking the windows? Are they sneaking in through the garage? So having the information about what's going on in your neighborhood or your industry can be very valuable as well. if you can get to the point where you're partnering with other banks that are even the same size or different organizations that are the same size as yours, that's even more valuable information than that someone that's in your industry but they're way bigger than you or way smaller than you. So the more you're able to partner, especially within your industry, that's another great way of being able to supplement your controls with meaningful intel. Of course, lastly, the big bucket, pretty much anything that's happening on the internet, if it's new or unique or special in any sort of way, you're going to want to know what's going on with that campaign and try and get as much information as you can. It might just be a matter of making a few different changes in your organization to be able to defend against this new attack. Any questions on this one?
One wall of text.
Yeah, I guess this one is kind of a second wall of text, isn't it? All right, so there's certainly no shortage of challenges when it comes to threat intel, and data is the biggest problem at this point. There is an abundance of information. Just a few years ago, if you were in threat intel, you were trying to get as much data as you could because there wasn't a lot out there. 3-4 years ago or so, I mean, you'd be going to blogs, just reading a blog, trying to find bad IPs in some cases. I mean, it is completely flip-flop now. It is too much data. You've got to find a way to ingest the data that's most meaningful to you. So the volume of data is a huge problem. You can't take it all in, so you've got to decide what's the best source. And that's not easy. They won't necessarily tell you, where they're getting the data from or what it's related to. They'll just tell you, we've got, 5 million IP addresses a day or, whatever. They're just more about volume and quantity rather than quality.
So you think that so I could open up a company and just generate a bunch of IPs and just give it to you?
There will be people that buy it, yes. If you can create just a list of a whole bunch of bad information and start dumping it out, there will be people that want to buy it.
Yeah.
They'll think it's threat intel.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah.
It is.
It's called opportunity, not sad.
Capitalism.
That's scary.
Right up until you get accused of fraud, like selling something that was bad.
Yes, big one.
It was good at the time.
The lack of industry maturity is the problem as well, but that's going to come with time. As I mentioned, in terms of the different platforms, you got to have to piecemeal things together. I mean, a threat intel program is not going to be one or two pieces of technology. It's going to be a variety of technology to make that work now. In the future, they might be able to consolidate some of these features and capabilities into a bigger solution, but right now it's bits and pieces. In terms of the standards, everyone has an opinion on that. There's a variety of different indicator threat information sharing proposed standards. We'll get to a point where we either agree to accept these 2 or 3, or if we're lucky, maybe get down to just 1, but there's just not really a good way to communicate threat information from one organization to the next. And that's going to be key in being able to share. Of course, the previous slides we looked at, the increase in sophistication and frequency and all that is obviously a problem, and then the others are relatively obvious. In terms of some recommendations I could make, limiting your sources is big. Obviously, the amount of data that we've been talking about. You're going to have to think outside the box. I mean, this stuff's not going to be clear. I mean, they're not going to give you a list of all the things that you need to do. They're going to give you some ideas of things that you need to do, and you're going to have to do your homework to find out if it's something that you really need to do. Don't be dependent on your vendors, as I mentioned. I mean, the vendors are providing a one-size-fits-all, in a sense. It's good, it's important, but it's not tailored for your organization. Your vendor doesn't know exactly what you do and what's most important to you and what your key assets are, and maybe even who are the types of threats and types of attacks that you're going to be exposed to. That takes a little more focus, and being able to use your skills and employees that you already have to make those sort of decisions improve your security posture. Threat intel, don't expect threat intel to come in and fix all your problems. I mean, it's not a silver bullet, it's not a miracle, it's an enhancement to the controls that you already have.
Miracle?
It's unfortunately not. It'll be a miracle once we figure out how to do it right. That'll be the miracle. There are a lot of FUD providers out there. There are people that are able to sell feeds with nothing more than indicators in it, and they're calling it threat intel. That's not going to last long. People are going to figure this stuff out. They're going to understand what threat intel is, and those companies that are getting by with that, it's not going to last much longer. So your window of opportunity, Marcus, is closing quickly.
Yeah, so what's funny about it to me is, like, before you said that there were small resources, but they were kind of like from people that kind of knew what they were doing, blogs and all that.
Yeah.
Now there's too much information, so it's like you might as well not have threat intel because there's so much data to cover now. You have to cover so many bases.
It is a challenge. I mean, there's data comes in a variety of forms and from a variety of different locations. And the challenge now is definitely trying to figure out where the most valuable data can be collected from.
So that thing where I see a lot of security people and organizations, they spend more time managing this overhead where there's some kind of appliance or whatever, or too much data coming in, but you don't have time to actually look at what's going on in your network because you're trying to manage all that stuff. So
Yeah, it ends up being a distraction from the things that are important. Absolutely. Now, another interesting way of being able to improve your return on investment when it comes to threat intel is expand your audience. I mean, this isn't just about your security controls, improving them, although that is important. It's not just about senior management. I mean, you could be providing intel to your sales team, your corporate communications teams, the people that watch for inclement weather, in case you've got to close down. There's a lot, threat intel, depending on the types of tools that you're using to collect this information, can collect other information for other parts of your business that might be of value. Now, bad weather or earthquakes and hurricanes might seem like it's outside of threat intel, but it's still a threat to your business. So in some cases, you might be lucky enough to be using a product that's more than just seeking out indicators. It might be more event-based. So you'll be informed when there's events that are a threat to your organization and not just indicators. And of course, machine sharing, I mean, information sharing, there's all kinds of legislature and pushes to implement something more effective and rapid, I guess. And that's really the next big movement when it comes to threat intel. And that is it for my talk. There's several of the references that I used on here. The Vigilant one, the third one there, is the Ryan Stillings, where he goes through a discussion of all the different data and where to get it and the process. The Ryan Tross was the Black Hat one I mentioned. And the other ones. The first one, if you haven't read any white papers on threat intel, that MWR white paper up there at the top is probably one of the best when it comes to describing what threat intel is. And that's it. If you need to reach out to me, my contact information is there. I've got a little bit of my bio information in the description as well. Any questions?
So it's a two-parter. Do you personally deal with a lot of different feeds and have actually seen what the content is like for a lot of these providers?
Yes.
Okay. So based on that, say I were not interested in IOCs, but I'm really interested in things like TTPs. What sort of vendors or feeds have you seen that are actually pretty good about that?
That's definitely a more challenging area. A lot of the TTPs I've seen most of it being generated from other organizations sharing threats more so than the vendors sharing threat information. So the FSISAC platform, the Soltra, that's one of them. Because it sticks, they're getting to the point where they can add a lot more context. So part of it has to do with the standard in terms of being able to express a threat. Right now, we express threats through emails and through blogs. and it's unstructured. So sticks and Cybox and some of these other things are enabling that to be a more structured data set that's more easily packaged and shipped. So right now, not many of them can do it because of the lack of that ability to communicate in a standard way.
Got it. Thanks.
So a lot of, the TTPs right now come through email.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting most of them through our ISACs or just partners we have one-on-one sharing with, or ones that we've developed in-house. So
absolutely, you're right on. Anyone else?
Well, I just want I saw you had a couple of different cycles and all that stuff. A lot of those things a lot of those cycles right here. I always talk about scientific method. It's just using that as a good really template because it at least allows you to assess what's actually making a positive benefit from your thing, from your threat intel program or whatever program, because you can kind of observe okay, cool, this is exactly what works, test it, and form a hypothesis and all that stuff, observations, and then feed it back into the funnel. I think some of these things are saying that, but I think it should be a general thing that we do is try to bring more science to information security. Because if all these vendors are just creating crap and it's not helping anybody out, it can't be science.
No, absolutely. And the let's see, where's the one that had all the
methodology and show me your numbers.
Yeah, I mean, this one is a very scientific approach to the data, especially once you get down here. And he'll go into a little more of that in his presentation. But yes, the more time you can spend on looking at what indicators came in, which of these indicators had a positive match on something happening inside your environment. Well, all of a sudden that source got a few, notches in the value.
That's what I'm saying, because I think that people will be ingesting all this stuff
blindly, right?
And if you don't have any kind of process to evaluate that and whether it's successful, you're wasting your money.
Absolutely. You've got to identify those sources that are the most relevant to your organization, and the ones that aren't relevant, stop ingesting it. Focus on stuff that's most important.
Sure, absolutely.